Welcome to the Interlocutor Podcast. I'm Tyrel Cameron Eskelson. My guest today is Rolando Pujol. Rolando is a journalist who works at Channel 7 WABC in New York, and he's also what he calls a retrologist. He's just published his first book called The Great American Retro Road Trip, a celebration of Roadside Americana. Rolando, thank you very much for joining me today.
Tyrel, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'd like to start with defining a term or describing it, Roadside Americana. Could you share what this is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's at the heart of our conversation. It's, after all, the subtitle of the book. So Roadside Americana are those things that you will find attached to a business or some kind of attraction on the road that were designed and are designed to promote the business or the place, but not simply promote it from an informational perspective, as so much of what passes for signage and storefronts do today, but rather to do so in a way that is amusing and entertaining and exciting and quirky and different. And the best Roadside Americana has an emphasis on that word American. There's something about it that's big, that's perhaps a little bit gaudy, maybe even a little bit tacky, but it's unforgettable and it's very compelling. You see it and you kind of instantly know what it is, and you want to pull over and check it out, which is exactly the intention of it. The wonderful thing about Roadside Americana is that invented as a marketing tool over 100 years ago, it is still a very effective technique.
And another term that I used in the introduction a minute ago was a retrologist. In typing up my notes and questions for our conversation, I entered that into my Microsoft Word dictionary. So now it knows this word. Could you share what is a retrologist?
Good question. I sometimes ask myself the same thing. My hope would be that one day you won't have to enter it into your personal dictionary. It'll be the 2027 edition of Merriam-Webster's because the book was such a success. But we'll take it one step at a time. It's a term that I came up with in early 2012 to kind of describe what I do. I was starting at the time a Tumblr, remember Tumblr? And which still sort of exists kind of in the guise of a website, but it's really a Tumblr with my photos and essays going back to the spring of 12. And I was looking for a name for it, and I couldn't come up with one. There were all kinds of, very obvious things I could have done. I considered the Rewinding Road and various things like that, which would have had a double meaning because I'm also interested in television history and I work in television. So rewind has a play on tape and film as well. Retrologist sort of literally jumped into my mind one day, and it just made so much sense to me because, and anything with an ist is, in the English language, of course, is an individual who is a professional or an expert in something, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, right? And so what is a retrologist? Well, a retrologist is an expert, self-appointed, in all things nostalgia. But more so, there's also an implication in that term that there's some kind of expertise or some quasi-scientific approach to it. And not to overstate what I do, but I do think that I try to go through things in a very kind of thoughtful way. And I'm looking around my environment, looking for these things that are interesting. Not only the very large and obvious Roadside Americana, you can't miss a massive muffler man. They're right there, 30 feet tall, 25 feet tall. You can't miss them. But also, I'm looking for little things that might be survivors or hint at what a town or a city or a business or a community might have been before. So it's little things like looking at stickers on a bodega in New York City and seeing an old sticker for a cigarette brand from the days when cigarettes were widely available and sold. Well, they're certainly widely available, but they were much more part of the culture. Or it could be peeking under a awning of a business and finding an old plastic sign from the 60s or 70s, or even an old neon sign that has been covered up by something new and bland and banal. So I like to call it that in one of the interviews that I've done for the book, I began to describe it as almost putting on a pair of glasses or spectacles, Retrologist spectacles, where you look at the environment around you, but you look at it in a way where you're looking for the layers of history that are hidden in sometimes the most obvious places. These little things that you'll notice, even if you're, walking down the street and you notice a manhole cover that will feature a defunct brand name for the local phone company from 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. That's kind of interesting to me. That is very much something that I've always done in my life. I've always had these kinds of interests and have noticed these kinds of things, but didn't really start to write about them until about professionally working for newspapers, probably around 2005. I began to cover this stuff. And then personally with my Tumblr, and then later the Instagram, and then the Substack, and now finally the book, starting in 2012. So the Retrologist is a neologism just to sort of capture the various aspects of what I do. But if you were to try to sum it down to one sentence, it is a Retrologist looks at the world around them in search of what once was, what we can learn from that to help understand our present and perhaps even guide us into the future.
I do think this word is going to be in dictionaries and part of the language moving forward, because when I first read it, it didn't even strike me as a newly coined word. I thought, oh, that makes sense. This is an expert who studies retro things. So,
Right, exactly. Although nitpickers might come along and say, well, retro is really sort of a modern take on the past. So you're really more of a vintage guy. So but vintageologist doesn't roll off the
doesn't
tongue
quite
nearly
work.
as much. So it doesn't have the alliteration with my first name either. So we stuck with retrologist.
Hearing you describe that, I didn't even think of this till now, but nearly 20 years ago, when I was back at home with the summer off from college, I worked for the local municipality, just doing odd jobs for them. And one of the things that we did one week was we had to take this large excavator and tear down an old building that was on Main Street. And before we tore it down that morning, we went upstairs on the second floor. There was an old diner up there. And there were signs, these big signs up there, maybe from the 70s. And just instinctually, I said, we got to keep these. Let's take these back to the office. And everyone else sort of agreed that, yeah, maybe we should. And they're probably just sitting there, but maybe someday someone will come along and they'll be used to them, or they'll find interest in them, or they'll go to the museum or something, who knows. But it was a little bit of I realized a retrologist thing to do there, just instinctually, right?
Absolutely. I think we all have these instincts and to preserve and to save that which is valuable from the past, because it's part of our story. It's part of our memory. It's part of us. And we think about that diner in that particular case, and you might consider relatives that perhaps ate there, or people that went there that you knew or are related to you who are no longer around. And saving that history, however mundane it is, I think is incredibly valuable. Fortunately, there has been a trend in the United States over the past 20 years to preserve more of these places. There's more awareness of the value of old signs and tchotchkes from businesses, artifacts, and they're ending up in what seems to be a growing number of museums that are centered around signage or Americana. The granddaddy of them all is probably the American Sign Museum in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is featured in the book. And if you haven't been, I strongly recommend a trip out to Cincinnati to see it, and then of course to enjoy some Cincinnati style chili as well, because it is really, really very good. Cincinnati is a great town, and Ohio's quite possibly one of my favorite states. So much in the way of Roadside Americana. But yes, what you did, I think, is very important to honoring the history of the space, the people who worked there, and the people who patronized the place. I mean, I think it's important to hang on to these aspects of our past, and this is where it gets complicated, find ways to celebrate, right? Because it is nice to save something and put it aside, but if it just sort of sits in a room and collects dusts, it's better than losing it, of course, but that can be somewhat sad. One of the words that most disappoints me when a classic roadside sign is felled or is removed, the business closes, is that the sign ended up in a personal collection. And I've got, again, nothing wrong with people having personal collections of roadside ephemera. That's wonderful. I much prefer it survives in a personal collection than it not. And with a personal collection, there's always the hope that one day it might surface, or the individual might at some point donate it to an institution that wants to take care of it. But I'd much rather, my ideal for these things, for example, in the case of this, I guess there wasn't much you could have done because the building was being demolished. So, but I'm a big believer in adaptive reuse if possible. So if we can protect the sign and save the sign in place and incorporate it into the new business, whether it be on the facade or even bring it inside and put it in a hallway somewhere, it'll add something distinctive and a moment for people to stop and reflect and take them out of their day-to-day, or keep it somewhere else in town. We see a lot of this where a sign cannot be saved in place, but it might reemerge somewhere else in the community, or another community might take it and show it off, or it ends up in a sign museum. But to the extent that a sign can be preserved and kept in the wild as close as possible to its original location and as close as possible to its original use, the better. But of course, we're realists here, and that doesn't happen. The goal is, at the end of the day, is for it to be saved. So you did the Lord's work 20 years ago as a college student.
So going back to your childhood, how important were family road trips, and when did you first discover a passion for this, that you liked this stuff?
Wow. Well, I think for me, the realization that I love this stuff came very early. I was 4, and I can point specifically to one particular trip, which was a road trip taken in July of 1977 from the suburbs of New York City, where I grew up, down to Miami Beach, Florida. My family is from Cuba. We're Cuban, and so it is a rite of passage. It is a yearly ritual that one must go down to Miami to check in with one's fellow Cubans and engage in what is known as La Cubanea, right, to enjoy the environment down there. My parents, as recent immigrants from Cuba, loved going to Miami, and they are still with me, thank goodness, and they still enjoy going down there. But that first trip, at least the first trip that I remember at the age of 4, made one heck of an impression on me. Certainly, I vividly remember the trip because we did it in a 1975 Ford Granada sedan that my parents, to save a few bucks, decided not to have air conditioning installed in. And so I was sick for most of the trip down to Miami, but that neither here nor there. That has not spoiled my memories of the trip. One of the highlights of it was a visit to south of the border, which is a roadside attraction in Dillon, South Carolina. It gets its name from its location just south of the North Carolina border. And to sort of match that location and to find a sort of a theme for it, this is back in the 50s, early 60s, it adopted a sort of a ersatz kind of Mexican theme with a jolly character known as Pedro, who can be spotted throughout the campus. When you're 4 years old and you walk into a place like this, it makes, and it's just so over the top and gaudy and just a feast for the eyes, it makes a heck of an impression. And it certainly did on me. I was just riveted with Pedro and south of the border. And it wasn't just the visit. Pedro very expertly uses one of the great roadside Americana marketing tools, which is to deploy a blitzkrieg of billboards in hundreds of miles in either direction of said attraction. So starting back then, I think they started much farther north than they do now, but you'd start to see these signs for, and many of them had puns. They would say chili today, hot tamale, stop at Pedro, 99 miles ahead. That was known as Pedro's Weather Report. The classic one, which there have been different iterations of over the years, which is in the book, is the one that features a gigantic sausage, big hot dog. And it says, "You've never seen sausage place," a painful pun, but very much in the spirit of Pedro and south of the border. And to take that picture, I had to pull over on I-95, which, if you've ever driven 95, this is not generally a good thing to do if self-preservation is on your list of priorities for any given day. But I did it, and I'm glad I have the picture. So Pedro, as people informally call it, made quite the impression on me. And then down in Miami, the mid-century modern hotels and motels along Collins, South Beach, which of course back in the 70s was a very, very different place with many retirees, many of them of Jewish heritage. The joke, of course, was that South Beach was God's waiting room. Not nice, but certainly in the spirit of the folks who lived there at the time. But these places made a very, very big impression on me. And then, of course, the stops along the way at McDonald's and Burger King and Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's in the 70s was a marvelous place, completely geared to entertain families and children. We think of fast food places now in a very different way. Most of the designs are very antiseptic. I call it the McBox architecture style, where it's just a big, Bauhausian ripoff, and it's all glass and empty space and sleek surfaces, which are very nice in a certain way. It's clean and it's elegant, but it's boring and dull. And it's not just McDonald's doing this. It's really almost not entirely, but largely across the board. And so visiting a McDonald's in 1977 or even 1987 or even 1997 was a very different experience than it was today, with the play places and the McDonald Land character statues made of fiberglass that dotted the playgrounds. And I'm looking right now at a model that a brilliant fellow created of an Officer Big Mac jail, where you go up inside of it and there's this little kind of jail that you can go in there and play, and kids would notoriously get stuck in there, and there were issues with that kind of thing. So all of this made a whopping impression, not just of course on this one trip in 1977, but throughout the years. I just love this stuff. And I quickly noticed that when I'd see that a place was gone, that it had closed for some reason, the sign had been changed or removed, I'd get very upset. My foundational trauma occurred sometime around the age of 8 or 9, when there was a Great Bear Automotive Center in anyone who knows the New York City suburbs in Westchester knows of Central Park Avenue. And there was a place there in Hartsdale that had a smiling bear sign, metal, which was used by as part of this chain. There's still quite a number of them out there. And every time I passed it, I'd yell out in Spanish, also the bear, the bear. I loved the bear, and I was obsessed with the bear. And then one fine day, the bear was gone, and I just had a difficult time accepting that. And so the interest was planted there at an early age. I was always a little bit different than other people on vacation who wanted to just hang out at the beach or go to the museum. I wanted to see the town. I wanted to understand the place. Things like this, I'd say, hey, pull over. I want to see that. I wasn't necessarily documenting or taking pictures, but these things were making impressions on me. So this began early, and I'm a big believer that the subjects that fascinated you as a child, if you can find a way to tap into them as an adult, you're living that much closer to you were realizing a childhood dream and fully realizing your potential when this is something that you care so much about. Having the opportunity to share it with people, whether it be on social media or in a book, through a podcast with you, is a great privilege and honor. So that was all over the place, but I think you get the idea. So.
Yeah, and I like that insight at the end there. I think that's valuable to hear. You mentioned something a little earlier about an element of risk or danger involved in taking some of these photos. One of the important words we talked about earlier in this Americana was roadside, and you have well over 1,000 photos. In the book, there's just under 1,000 photos,
That's
but
about right.
in your
Yep. I don't actually,
collection,
I
there's
should count them once and for all, but it's right about 1,000, correct?
uh, but being that frequent, standing on the roadside has got to increase the possibility of some kind of dangerous thing happening. Are there any memorable examples where you risked your life to get one of these photos? Sorry
Well,
to put it so crudely.
no. Listen, every so often you have these unfortunate encounters with people who don't appreciate what you're doing. Most of them can be talked off the ledge. Or before they look for a weapon of some kind. When you explain why you're there, why you're taking the picture, you tell them that their business or this thing in their downtown is precious and special and unique, and people love it, and people will love it. Their tone changes. They're like, "Oh, really? You think that sign's interesting? Oh, never occurred it was particularly special. Oh, you're going to post this on Instagram? Really? What's that?" And you get into a conversation with the person, and you can break through it. But some of them don't end very well, and some people don't appreciate what you're doing. I was on a trip back in 2018. I won't name the state or the location, mainly to protect myself from any potential liability. But we were photographing a motel. We were in the parking lot, and it was a very interesting sign. Just grabbing a few pictures, and we were not going to be there more than 30 seconds. And just as we were doing this, the owner or manager or some official type person came in a pickup truck, and if he didn't run us over, it's a miracle. He didn't run us over, and it's a miracle. He came in there, guns blazing, no guns, but ablazing, and wanted to know what we were doing, and was very upset, and urged us to go away, and which we did. I have certainly no desire to be a victim of this passion in a way that does not ensure a return trip home. But unfortunately, the worst of what you encounter is the occasional Oscar the Grouch who gives you a hard time or yells at you or doesn't get it. I once had a very unpleasant encounter in Chicago in an old restaurant that was quite beautiful. And I usually ask before I start taking pictures inside, unless it's obviously a place where people are doing it and it's not a problem. And in this case, I had gone in the business I always try to support it if possible. So I said, let me buy a cup of coffee. I'm not going to eat here, but I'll get a cup of coffee. There was a gentleman in the kitchen who saw that I had snapped a quick picture on my phone and proceeded to yell at me and tell me to delete it, and how dare you, and how you have no right to do this. And I quickly apologized and said, "You're right, sir. Sorry. Can I take a picture?" And he's like, "No, you can't. And it's too late now. You ruined your chance." And he was an absolute unpleasant person. I'll respect the FCC guidelines here. And again, you see these people from time to time, but generally speaking, most of my experience is on the road, and I've been stopping in places and interacting with people this way now consistently on a regular basis since, let's say, 2008, 2009. Have been very, very, very positive. But there's always the risk of an encounter with a crazy person or a mean person. And but in terms of actual physical threat, I generally, with the occasional silly thing like pulling over on the side of I-95 or walking through a thicket of thorny weeds and shrubs, and then finding myself enmeshed in some kind of almost quicksand. It wasn't quicksand, but it felt like it, to get a picture of a radio station, WMCA, in Kearney, New Jersey. That picture is one of my favorites in the book. It's toward the front of the book, and many have said, a couple of the people have told me it's their favorite in the book. But what was required to get that picture involved all kinds of thorns being jabbed into me and an actual cut in my arm that probably should have probably needed a stitch or two or four, but it
Wow.
healed eventually. But but when my friend who was accompanying me saw the cut, he's like, "Oh, let's get out of here." I'm like, okay, that's enough for the day. Putting the camera down.
So we should probably talk about the other side of this, and how important is it that when you're visiting these places, you're interacting with the people and the families that it's the grandchildren now running this diner or motel or pharmacy, whatever it is, but you go in and interact with them and talk about the history of where this sign comes from or what this business means to the family, to the community. That's probably, I imagine, one of the most, if not the most rewarding part of this work.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because there's different ways to approach this book. I could have done a more traditional coffee table book that emphasized photography and just mentioned the place, Hildebrandt's, Williston Park, New York, opened circa 1926, 28, whatever year, right? And that would have been fine. And might have been, but certainly would have been easier. But I wanted to, and I couldn't for every picture and every location, but where possible, I wanted to tell the story of the place, or at least offer some helpful context for the story of the place. I thought this was vital because I sort of want people to understand that these places don't exist by accident. There's somebody, or usually somebodies, who are making a conscious decision to keep that business open and are unquestionably fighting all kinds of headwinds, including the most troubling financially. And sometimes even, depending on the neighborhood, maybe it's not even the safest place to continue to operate, but they stay in business. So I think those who make that choice to continue a family business in that manner, or take it over from somebody else and carry it forward because they see the value of having the business in the community, I think those people are to be commended, and their stories are to be celebrated. So where possible, I like to stop inside, and if I can find the manager, or if somebody very friendly will give me some context about the place. I love to take notes and offer that kind of context when I publish the photo to social media, or obviously for the book more importantly. Because you get so many interesting stories, some of which really break your heart. One in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, a couple of years ago, I stopped in a place called Millie's, and I had liked it because it was an old school, Coca-Cola style privilege sign, with old corrugated metal, and very attractive classic New York storefront, which were like a dime a dozen in the 70s and 80s and 60s, and kind of like Starbucks is today, but now they're quite rare. And I went inside, and the owner was there, this lovely woman, an immigrant from South America, who told me the story of the business and told me that she named the business after her daughter, who had yet to immigrate to the United States, as almost a tribute to her. And so you hear stories like that. Another business in Staten Island that had a similar storefront that drew me there. And I got to meet these brothers who were keeping this old hardware store alive in memory of their father, who had recently passed away of COVID-19. I had stopped by with no expectation that the business would be open. I'd read it was closed. I just wanted to get down there, get a picture of the storefront before the place was erased from the streetscape. And suddenly the family was there, and I couldn't believe my luck. And I went inside and spoke to them. So I love telling those stories, and there are so many that are just so compelling. One more I'm very fond of is Hildebrandt's, which is a luncheonette and ice cream parlor on Long Island in Nassau County, the community of Williston Park, and they almost went out of business in 2020. And the family that had been running the restaurant since the 70s had reached out to me to see if I could do anything to help. I certainly got word out on social media. I activated the reporting staff at WABC to do some stories about it. Eventually, heroes emerged from the community who loved the place enough and couldn't tolerate the idea of losing it, that they bought it and took it over themselves, and they've invested a lot of time and money and effort in reimagining it in a way, but emphasizing things like their ice cream, which has always been very good, and selling it, and marketing it, but keeping the things about the place that are special, in particular the old-timey feel inside the luncheonette seating, and the beautiful vintage sign, which every time I post Hildebrandt's, it people just love it on social media. It just so happens that I posted Hildebrandt's about an hour ago, right before I got on this call. I did a roundup of ice cream places, 20 locations for National Ice Cream Day, July 20th, and led off with Hildebrandt's because it is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful storefronts in the country. But it's got a great story behind it. Is a story of families and saviors and customers who rely on it. When I was doing a story about Hildebrandt's for WABC, it was so interesting to see customers that were coming in while we were filming, and so many of them were stopping the new owner and thanking them for saving the place, and for they were just grateful that their afternoon tradition of stopping in for a cheeseburger could be preserved. So yes, you absolutely said it. For me, a big part of the book and a big part of my mission in being the quote unquote Retrologist is celebrating the unsung heroes behind these places. Why are these places significant, right? I mean, just think how boring and banal and uninteresting our downtowns, our communities would be if it had the same set of businesses that are in every other community around the country. If there was nothing interesting visually or historically, if there were no layers of the past. There's a reason why people love to live in places like, Brownstone, Brooklyn, or Greenwich Village, or Soho, because of the history, the architecture, the texture of the mom and pop businesses, the quirky cheese shop and the bakery store, and the guy who's been there shining shoes since 1980. And people love this stuff. And yet the success of these neighborhoods and the escalating real estate costs makes it that much harder for these businesses that give the texture, that make it an interesting place to be, for them to survive. And I always find that almost to be the disturbing irony in that as a neighborhood becomes more successful, the things that make it so appealing, which I think is significantly the businesses that are there begin to suffer. In the United States, with some exceptions, there really aren't protections for shops. A place can be landmarked, but that's not going to come with any money to help the place survive a difficult period. And we certainly saw that with the pandemic, where we lost so many businesses. It was heartbreaking. I felt like almost every day I was the Grim Reaper. I was reporting this iconic place that I visited just last year has decided to close or shut down for a long time because of the pandemic. But the pandemic woes are just the one of a litany of challenges that these shops face to stay in business and to stay relevant.
I enjoyed the look within the businesses, hearing stories like, I think it was Lexington's that had a scene with Robert Redford and 3 Days in the Condor, and the man who, I can't remember his name, at Phillips or Philly or something.
John Phillips.
He was in the movie, right?
He's in the movie. If you cue up that scene with Robert Redford at the counter, it's extraordinary. I mean, you see that scene, and that place doesn't look that different. I mean, it's basically still there, and there's very few places that were around in 1975 in New York that you can walk into and still get the same feel. But you hear him yell, "Chicken platter," in the background. He must have been a teenager at that point, just a not much more than a kid. And John sat down with me a couple of years ago for an extended interview for a piece that I did for ABC's Localish, and then also for my separately for my Instagram and my Substack. He was very generous with his time and telling me the story of the place and how, he when he worked there, it was a family business, and he figured that it would be something that he would do for a while, and then he'd move on to other things. He had other ambitions in life, and then the years became decades, and he realized that he had found his life calling, and he didn't have to go very far. It was keeping the Lexington candy shop alive, and he's a marvelous man, a lovely man with a big heart, very generous, and just such a perfect steward for this place. I really hope if he hears this and I'll tell him this. I hope to visit him soon. It's part of story I'm working on about the book. I hope he knows how important the work that he's doing, that he has devoted his life to something very, very crucial, which is preserving this important institution. That neighborhood on the Upper East Side would be significantly diminished if the Lexington Candy Shop were to close, or if somebody were to take it over and completely scrap the interior and come up with a new concept and just keep the name. We see a bit of that happening these days with these, they're kind of like almost zombie restaurants where they take over the space, the name, the sign might get cleaned up or restored or a replica built, but the soul of the old place is not kept, and maybe it can't, and maybe it's better that something survives and nothing, but we've seen that happen a few times. But I think of the Upper East Side and another business that wasn't far from the Lexington Candy Shop, Neil's Coffee Shop, which was at on 70th Street. And this was a classic, perhaps the best surviving example of the typical New York City coffee shop, which is not quite a diner and not quite a luncheonette, but just a place that you kind of go to have a sandwich and have some coffee and chit-chat a little bit and just tuck into a booth and maybe read the newspaper and kill an hour or two and be on your way, right? At one point, coffee shops were an important third place in New York City. And this place was great. Oh, what character, inside and out, beautiful neon sign hanging from the corner. And they sadly closed. Years ago, when I interviewed Matt Weiner, the creator of Mad Men, I was doing a piece about, for AM New York, where I was the managing editor and a frequent writer. I was doing a piece about Don Draper's New York, places that Don Draper, if he were, we would hang out with him in the 1960s, where would he take us? Where would he hang out? And one of the places that Weiner suggested was Neil's Coffee Shop, because he was thinking of that place as a place where Don would patronize. And the fact that it was still around 40, 50 years later was just remarkable. And when it closed and the sign disappeared, I'm not yet sure what happened to it. Somebody must know. Maybe somebody listening to this will tell me. It was a great loss. And to me, the neighborhood is diminished, because I almost rented an apartment within a block of that place about 10 years ago. Ended up not working out for whatever reason. But the thought that the biggest draw for me was like, wow, I'm going to be a neighbor of Neil's. I could pop in there all the time. I'll become friends with the waiters. I'll be a regular. Maybe I'll just start a tab. And the fact that it's gone, devastating. And believe me, I understand that things change and business evolve, and not everything can be kept frozen in amber. But I do think that our society makes it far too easy for valuable places that have managed to survive for decades to, out of the blue, close. We're seeing a great and tragic example of this playing out right now. You may have heard about it. French Dip, which is one of two places in Los Angeles that claims the respectable title of being the inventor of the French Dip sandwich. They have been around since 1908. I mean, think about that. In 17 years, and they're going out of business, and their last day of business will be August 3rd. And I saw some video today online of a long line of people who are trying to get into Kohl's now because it's going out of business. Where were those people 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, or 1 year ago, or during the pandemic? Don't mean to castigate or judge, because I'm guilty of the same. We tend to appreciate that which is threatened or is no longer with us. And I wish there was some way that Kohl's could survive, being the fact that it's 117 years old. Couldn't the city or some public-private partnership that does not exist step in and say, we can't let this place go. We'll figure out something for it, even if it's a museum for a while. But unfortunately, we're not very good at that. You look at Europe, and there are restaurants and businesses and hotels that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years that were around when our country was founded. And we're not very good at that, unfortunately, with some notable exceptions. And I wish that could change. And maybe a book like mine can help inspire some change in that regard.
Yeah. I'd like to ask how when you're at home, how do you search for new places to go visit? And how does that compare to being out somewhere in America doing your work and finding new places spontaneously that you didn't know were there, but you discovered them because you're looking for this stuff specifically?
Exactly. I can't tell you the number of times that going to one place reveals something else. And because usually if there's one, there's more. That tends to be a rule in life for all kinds of things, good and bad. And it is certainly that when it comes to Roadside Americana. But my research normally begins there's a number of online resources that document this stuff. Two in particular are Marvelous Roadside America and roadarch.com that is run by my friend Deborah Jane Seltzer, who herself has written a fine book on the signs of America. And she's a fellow member of the Society of Commercial Archaeology. And she's done yeoman's work documenting places like this around the country. So obviously check her site. And then I very, very closely monitor a wide range of social media feeds. And there's stuff that pops up all the time that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Or I didn't know that was there. But again, and then what I do is I have Google Maps set up that are private, but I share them with people when they ask, and with subscribers to my Substack. I will just drop a pinpoint in the map. And so like we're having a conversation right now. You mentioned something to me in Sausalito, California. Well, if I don't know about it, it's not there, I pop it in. So that next time I'm in the area or I'm planning a trip to the area, I can go and visit. But my antennae are up and looking for this kind of information no matter where I am. So I could be watching a news report in another city, and in the background, the reporter is doing a stand-up, and in the background, I see this neon sign for a diner, and I'm like, I didn't know that was there, and I'll look it up and I'll put it in. I also do, when I'm beginning to think about trips, and if I identified a geographic location, I do a lot of deep dives on Flickr. There's a lot of great material on Flickr, much of it old, that survives from the period when Flickr was a more widely used, but there is a lot of good stuff in there. And then Google Street View is a gift, right? You can just see, if you're going to a town to see one thing, you might want to see, and you're maybe not sure that this stop is worth it, you might take a virtual poke around to see what's there and if it's really worth your while or not. So I'm basically in a state of constant research for this stuff. And then when I'm planning a trip, that's when I sit down and create a separate sheet with the locations that I think are key to visit, fully knowing and expecting that there are going to be new discoveries and significant deviations. I visited Montana back in the winter of 22, in February of 22. I went all the way out there to visit Hamilton, Montana, to visit a Kmart. And most people go to Montana to see Yellowstone or bison or Big Sky Country or what have you. No, Glacier National. I go to see a Kmart. And the reason I wanted to go was because this was the last Kmart in the country that had the vintage Kmart logo that was used into the 90s with the descending K, the descender, and beautiful sign. And it was store was up against a mountain range. Beautiful, striking shot that you might think is AI, right? But that is in fact real. I mean, beautiful juxtaposition. So I use that as an excuse to grab a friend who isn't very into this stuff, but tolerates it. And he'll go along with me, keep me company. And I put together an itinerary for things to see in Montana. Great Falls, Montana was not on my list. I somehow did not yet know about the Sip and Dip, which is a kind of a tiki bar that features mermaids, women in mermaid costumes who swim in a tank that's actually attached to a pool behind the bar. There are some mermen too, I'm told occasionally, but regardless, it is a beautiful place. And so, from the minute I got there, I'd arrived in Bozeman, and again I'm poking around, talking to people, and they're like, "Well, how long are you going to be in the state?" A week. Oh, great. Then I assume you're going to the Sip and Dip in Great Falls. And I'm like, no, what's that? You don't know? What kind of a retrologist are you? I'm like, oh, sorry. No, I knew what it was. So I was just kidding. And I heard this like 3 times. So there was a part of the state I wanted to get to, and I told my pal, look, we're just going to have to skip it because we have to go see the Sip and Dip. And we went. And it was great. And we had just missed in that very, very final way, a woman who was Piano Pat, as she was called, who played the piano there for decades, since the early 60s. And she was a legend and had been profiled on national news programs. And she died not long before. And I was so sad to hear that, because if I'd known about this place even a year or two sooner, I could have met her. I could have interviewed her. And now I can't. So that reminded me of just the enormity of how much there is to find still, and the importance of getting out there and documenting and seeing these places as soon as possible. I would have greatly regretted it if the Sip and Dip had not ended up in the book. And I wasn't going to include a place that I'd not been to, so I'm glad I made it there. But I can't tell you the number of places that I learn simply this way when I learn about them on a trip, and if possible, I try to get there. A feeling far worse than ignoring that advice is realizing that you were one town over from some marvel that you didn't know about, because you hadn't done enough research, or you were in a rush, or whatever, you missed it, and then you're now 1,200 miles away, and then you hear that the place is closing and you never got to it. So that happens to me more often than I'd care to admit. But
well, those will be in the second
yes,
great American retro road trip, because there
Your
are that
list
many
body,
great places.
I hope so.
Has this taken you to all 50 states? This
Nope.
work?
I wish I
No?
could claim that. I came close. If I'd had another month or two to do travel and research, I would have made it to Alaska and Hawaii. But Alaska and Hawaii did not make the cut in the book. When I pitched the book, I did foresee including Alaska and Hawaii, maybe even a little bit of Canada, U.S. adjacent Canada, because there's a lot there that is very Americana style, if you will. And I wish I could have included it, but it didn't quite fit. But I did manage to touch base in every 48, all 48, lower 48, the contiguous states. I was able to see all of them. And when I started this project, I had probably seen 42 or 43. So there was a significant amount of travel. By no means was all this work done when the opportunity came along to write the book. Publisher reached out to me based on the work that I was doing to see whether I was interested in writing a book. And I said, of course I am. I've been waiting for this call my entire life. Where do I sign, right? And so I put together a pitch, and they accepted it. And initially, I wasn't thinking of it as being quite as comprehensive as it turned out to be. But as I kept going, there were just so many places I wanted to include. And so I think I organized it as logically as I could, and broke it down by geography, and then within that, within category, to the best that I could. Maybe I would have done some things differently, undoubtedly. Some places I wish I would have included that didn't make it in. But God willing, the book sells well, and there'll be a demand for a second and a third edition, because I would be more than happy to include it, because there's so much I've seen even since the book hit the presses that I want to include, and sadly, places that are in the book that are no longer around. that even in the past 7 months since the deadline have closed or been fundamentally altered in a way that means I either take them out of the book or I have to explain what happened.
One of the things that I study is the country of Taiwan. I was interested in the chapter on California. There's an old important restaurant there called Formosa, and I was wondering if you had any insights into why they chose that as a name.
Oh, that's a good question. I probably want to do a little more research to make sure I'm buttoned up, but I do know that there was in that time an immense interest in the world of the Pacific Rim and broader in the culture from that part of the world, and this gave the restaurateurs basically a theme or something to apply to the business. But I probably would want to do a little more research before I gave you a Retrologist approved answer, stamp of approval answer to that question. But I do find that a very interesting place, in part because we came pretty close to losing it. It closed, and it looked like it might be gone. And an interesting group of restaurateurs in Los Angeles called the 1933 Group. What they do is really very, I mean, incredible work. Talk about important work. They take over and revitalize historic businesses that are either on the brink or have closed, reimagine them in a way, update them for the 21st century, but still keep their historic bona fides in place. And they've done that with Formosa, which let's see, do I have it here? Hold on, give me a second. I do. Here are my Formosa chopsticks. Meet me
Nice.
at Formosa, which I kept as a souvenir from a visit there last year. And they've also done that with Tail of the Pup, which is also in the California chapter, and that's a hot dog stand shaped like a hot dog, with a bun and the hot dog itself. It's really, really cute, and it had been in storage for many years, and I think a lot of people had given up hope that it would ever resurface. And when I heard that it had been purchased by the 1933 Group, I said, "Aha, these guys are going to do the right thing. They're going to do right by it."
When you started sharing your photos on Instagram and other social media sites, what were the response and enthusiasm for other people who you discovered are interested in this kind of stuff? I imagine that's also an enjoyable part too, is interacting with a community of people who appreciate this stuff.
Oh my God, that's quite honestly, I like to think that I would do it if nobody cared, but eventually you'd be like, well, nobody cares. Take your marbles and go home, right? I love the fact that people care, and I'm by no means the only, I hate this term, influencer in this space. There are many excellent people doing similar kind of documentation who have amassed large audiences too, and love interacting with readers and with fellow fans of this stuff. To me, that's the best part. And quite honestly, I could show you my call history or my emails, and some of my best friends are people that I met through this kind of work, who were either folks who did the same kind of documentation, and at some point we said, you know what, we have an awful lot in common, we ought to meet. And so we did, and we became friends. Imagine getting a group of 6 or 7 or 8 people together for a trip to meet, and halfway across the country, you've never met any of these people in person before, and you don't know really who they are or what they're about or what intentions they might or might not have. But so far, trips like that have gone great, and then you also meet people who aren't necessarily documenting this stuff, but they appreciate it, and so they followed you and they enjoy your work and they support your work. There are people who, they've followed me on Substack, they bought the book, and it's meaningful to have people who, support you in that way, because that's what honestly keeps you going. This book could never have happened and without readers who care about what I do and are interested in the same and same subject. In my acknowledgments, I give thanks to a lot of people, but the biggest show of thanks is held for the very end, and that is for readers, for supporters, people who have been there for me on Instagram and Substack and have stuck with me and have been along on this journey with me. I'm so grateful for that. It just adds so much meaning and texture. I'm not going to lie. There are periods where I get a little burned out. You can probably go back in my timeline and see large gaps where, and then if I don't post for more than a few days, maybe a week or two, invariably you'll start to get messages from people. Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? Is everything all right? Do you need help? Is something happening? Are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm just a little burnt out. But you know what? I'm going to post something tonight. I'll do something tonight. Yeah. Okay, thanks for checking in. I appreciate it. And that's why I don't think I'll ever quite abandon this, because I feel that it brings meaning and value to people's lives. And I know that sounds really self-important, and it's not anything special about me. I think it's just the fact that I celebrate this in a certain way, and I clearly love it and have a passion for it, and I think people feel it. I think there are, if you go on Amazon or a bookstore, you'll find many travel books around America. I think what makes this one special is the heart in it and the passion in it and the joy, I'd like to think, that comes out of the pages. When people who've picked up the book, who know me, they're like, Jesus, it's like having you. I mean, I can sense you in every word. This is such a you book. And perhaps the most uncharitable feedback I've gotten so far, invariably some people like it, some people don't, is that they were expecting a more traditional, straightforward travel guide. You arrive in California on day one, visit this town, and this town, and this town, and then spend the night here. Tomorrow, the next day, you're now in San Diego. So much to see in San Diego. Let's break it down. Nothing wrong with that kind of travel book. I have many of them on my shelves. One of my favorites is one of those kinds of travel books that gives you the blow by blow. I wasn't trying to do that book, and if somebody picks up the book and that's not, maybe they don't know what they're going to get into, but I think if they give the book a chance and just sort of lean into it, I'd like to think they'll learn something, and more important, I'd like to think, inspired, and maybe even start to look at things, going back to the initial question about what is a retrologist, begin to look at their environment around them, not only when they're on vacation, but day to day, walking to the train or going downtown. They'll start to see things that are interesting and appreciate them and learn more about the place where they live and the people who made this place where they live so interesting and worthwhile.
The last question I'd like to ask you is about the process of coming up with the title and subtitle. I like having authors give me a little insight into that aspect of publishing a book. What I'm particularly interested in, and it might be a little bit of a reiteration, but I'd like you to talk about the word in your subtitle, celebration. I think that's a specifically chosen word, and I think it would be great to hear you explain why that's the right word for what you're doing here.
Right. I'll start with the title. This thing just popped into my head. Like when I was putting together, the publisher had reached out, the editor, Shoshana, who was my guide through this entire process, and without whom I would be talking to you right now. And she saw something in this material that maybe I didn't even. And when I was putting together the formal pitch, and trying to come up with the concept for the book, so what am I trying to do here? And initially I thought there are different ways to attack it, to be more specific or take on a particular slice of Americana. Maybe it's just fast food, or maybe it's just roadside giants. But when I decided finally I wanted to do it all, and I wanted the trip to reflect the way that I travel, bouncing around the country and seeing this and seeing that, and sometimes it's a little herky-jerky, but it's all very interesting, I think anyway. It popped into my mind. This is just going to be the great American road trip, a term that we hear a lot, but the Great American Retro Road Trip, because it's going to be a road trip that's filtered through a retro sensibility. So that popped into my mind, and then the deck, the subtitle, just wrote itself. A celebration of Roadside Americana. I was fully prepared for Artisan Books and its parent company, Hachette. And these people know what they're doing. Goodness, do they know what they're doing? They're brilliant. And I thought, oh well, they'll take this and do something amazing with it, and they'll come up with a better title. And they were like, nope, this is the title. We're not going to try to even improve this. I'm like, oh really? Great. So to the question of why celebration. There's different ways of looking at this material. I mean, and you could have, I could have taken perhaps a more scholarly approach or anthropological approach. I could have been certainly more critical of a number of places. There are places that are worthy perhaps of more criticism and or analysis, if you will, their role in society than I gave them. South of the border is a good example of that. There were a couple of others that I actually left out because I wasn't prepared to do that kind of critique in the places that were too controversial, in particular places that tread heavily on Native American iconography. I was very uncomfortable, largely including those, because they become very fraught and cause people a lot of pain. And I decided from the beginning that this book would be, to the extent that it was possible, a celebration. Not everything is wonderful in it. Not every story is a happy one. There are some grays, but I wanted this to be a book that you picked up and made you feel better about the country, and and gave you perhaps a new perspective on how to travel and what to look for in your trips. I mean, maybe you can still do the kind of trips that you do. For example, if you're going down to Disneyland or Disney World and spend a week. Great, terrific. I want you to do this. My parent company is the Walt Disney Company. They write my checks, so this is great. But maybe add to the trip to Disney stops in some of the places that are in the region, the small mom and pop, in the case of Florida, the roadside attractions like the Eli's Orange World and Gatorland and places of this kind that are so interesting and beautiful, and sometimes don't get visited because people go to the beaches or the resorts or the large theme parks and miss out on this roadside texture that would make their understanding of America that much richer and give them more and deeper memories to complement the more traditional place to visit. So I very much wanted this book to be a joyful thing. Without getting into it, these are very complicated times in the United States right now, both internally and our relationship with the rest of the world, living through unprecedented times. And I wanted this to be something that people could pick up and feel good about the country and feel good about the possibilities that are out there in the open road, that anyone, whether it be somebody who is an American or somebody visiting, could enjoy. And I hope, with you being overseas, I hope that people from around the world find the book and get something out of it, and that it inspires them to get to know the real Americans, which are just the folks who are the mom and pops, who are running these places coast to coast, who are just trying to make a good, decent, clean, and honest living. That's really what this book is about, ultimately, is celebrating them. I mean, their signs and their giants and their quirky buildings shaped like ducks and teapots are great and all, but it's the people, the wonderful people behind them, that I'm really trying to write a love letter to here.
And there's an enthusiasm and an optimism that's really compelling in this. So I think it's one of the great parts of reading the book and being able to interact with you, listen to you speak about it. So thank you so much for that opportunity today. Enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, I really did too. You're great at this, so keep doing it. And I can't wait to listen to this and share it with my followers.